The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Buckingham Palace as Queen Camilla stepped out of her private chambers. Her schedule for the day looked perfectly ordinary on paper, but something felt different. Perhaps it was the crisp autumn air, or maybe the unusually quiet atmosphere that hung over the palace grounds. Whatever it was, she couldn't shake the feeling that today would be anything but ordinary. As she made her way through the ornate corridors toward the East Wing, her personal secretary, Margaret, hurried alongside her with a tablet full of appointments and briefings. The Queen's mind, however, was elsewhere. She had noticed something peculiar over the past few weeks, something that had been bothering her more and more with each passing day. It all centered around one particular member of the Royal Guard. Sergeant James Mitchell had been stationed at the palace for nearly 5 years. His record was impeccable, his dedication unquestionable, and his service exemplary. On the surface, everything about him screamed model soldier. But Queen Camilla had observed something that others had either missed or chosen to ignore. During state functions and royal events, Mitchell maintained his position with military precision. His eyes never wavered from their designated watchpoints. His posture remained rigid and professional, and he followed every protocol to the letter. Yet the Queen had caught glimpses of something else. Brief moments when his expression would change, when his eyes would track movements they shouldn't, when his attention would focus on conversations he had no business listening to. At first, she dismissed it as paranoia. The weight of the crown, even when shared with King Charles, came with its own set of anxieties. Security concerns were always present, lurking in the back of every royal's mind. But as weeks turned into months, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Mitchell was always there, always watching, always listening. The breaking point came 3 days earlier, during a private dinner with several trusted advisors. They had been discussing sensitive matters related to upcoming diplomatic visits and potential security concerns. The conversation was meant to be confidential, held in a secure room with only vetted personnel present. Mitchell had been stationed outside the door, as was standard protocol. The next morning, details from that very conversation appeared in a tabloid newspaper. Not word for word, but close enough to cause alarm. The leak was precise, targeted, and devastating. It suggested that someone with direct access to the royal family's private discussions was feeding information to the press. The palace went into immediate lockdown mode, launching a quiet but intensive investigation. Queen Camilla had her suspicions, but she knew better than to act on instinct alone. She requested a private meeting with Sir Edward Hartley, the head of royal security. The conversation lasted 2 hours and covered everything she had observed about Mitchell over the previous months. Sir Edward listened carefully, his expression growing more concerned with each detail. They agreed on a plan. Nothing overt, nothing that would tip off Mitchell or anyone else who might be involved. They would conduct a thorough background check, review security footage, and monitor his activities more closely. But Queen Camilla insisted on one thing. If her suspicions proved correct, Mitchell would be removed immediately and quietly. The royal family had weathered enough scandals, and she was determined to handle this one with discretion and decisiveness, which brought her to this particular morning. The investigation had concluded overnight, and Sir Edward had requested an urgent meeting. She found him waiting in her private study, his usual composed demeanor slightly cracked by visible tension. He stood as she entered, a thick folder clasped in his hands. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice grave, "the investigation into Sergeant Mitchell has revealed information that I believe requires immediate action. The evidence we've gathered is both conclusive and deeply troubling." Queen Camilla seated herself in the high-backed leather chair behind her desk and gestured for him to continue. Sir Edward opened the folder and began laying out documents, photographs, and printed email exchanges. What they revealed was far worse than she had imagined. Mitchell hadn't just been eavesdropping and selling information to tabloids. He had been systematically collecting intelligence on the royal family's movements, private conversations, and security protocols. The investigation had uncovered encrypted files on his personal devices containing detailed logs of royal activities, photographs taken from his guard positions, and coded communications with unknown parties. The scope of the breach was staggering. He had recorded information about everything from the Queen's medical appointments to the King's private meetings with government officials. He knew the security rotation schedules, the backup protocols, the emergency procedures. He had access to information that could compromise not just the royal family's privacy, but their actual safety. Your Majesty, Sir Edward concluded, his expression dark, we need to remove him from his position immediately. However, we must do so in a way that doesn't alert any potential accomplices or outside parties he may be working with. I recommend we act today during the routine guard change at noon. Queen Camilla's jaw tightened. She had trusted her instincts, but even she hadn't expected the situation to be this serious. She looked at the evidence spread across her desk, then back at Sir Edward. Her voice was steady, but there was steel beneath it. Make the arrangements. I want him removed from the premises within the hour. Quietly, professionally, but permanently. And I want to know who he's been working with and why. This cannot happen again. Sir Edward nodded and left to put the plan into motion. Queen Camilla remained at her desk, staring at the evidence of betrayal. She had spent years learning to navigate the complex world of royal duties, public expectations, and private realities. But this felt different. This was personal. Someone had infiltrated their inner circle, violated their trust, and potentially put them all at risk. As the clock approached noon, she made her way to the East Terrace where the guard change would take place. She wanted to be there to see it through herself. This wasn't just about removing a security threat. It was about sending a message that the Queen would protect her family and her household, no matter what it took. Mitchell stood at his post, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. He maintained his perfect military bearing, his eyes scanning the grounds as they always did. He had no idea that every move he made was being watched, that his career and his freedom were about to come to an abrupt end. Queen Camilla took her position on the terrace, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. She watched as Sir Edward approached with 2 senior security officers flanking him. The moment of truth had arrived and everything was about to change. Sir Edward Hartley moved across the palace grounds with deliberate purpose. Behind him, 2 of his most trusted officers followed in perfect synchronization. They had rehearsed this moment a dozen times over the past 24 hours. Every step was calculated, every word scripted. There could be no mistakes, no room for error. Sergeant Mitchell was trained in combat and tactical response. If he sensed what was coming, if he had even a moment to react, the situation could spiral dangerously out of control. The East Terrace gleamed in the midday sun. The guard change was a choreographed ritual that happened twice daily with clockwork precision. Tourists gathered beyond the palace gates to watch the spectacle, cameras ready to capture the pageantry of British tradition. They had no idea they were about to witness something unprecedented in modern royal history. Mitchell stood at attention, his red uniform immaculate, his bearskin hat sitting perfectly atop his head. His rifle rested against his shoulder in the prescribed position. To anyone watching, he looked exactly as a royal guard should, dignified, disciplined, and utterly professional. Only Queen Camilla, watching from her vantage point above, knew the truth that lay beneath that pristine exterior. Sir Edward reached Mitchell's position and stopped precisely 3 feet away. His voice was low, meant only for Mitchell's ears, though several other guards were close enough to hear if they strained. Sergeant Mitchell, you are to come with us immediately. This is not a request. For the first time in weeks, Mitchell's composure cracked. His eyes flickered toward Sir Edward, breaking protocol. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He knew. In that instant, everything he had carefully constructed over 5 years began to crumble. His voice came out steady, but there was an edge to it. Sir, I'm currently on duty. The guard change isn't scheduled for another 10 minutes. Your duty here is concluded, Sergeant. Sir Edward's words were final, leaving no room for negotiation. The 2 officers stepped forward, flanking Mitchell on either side. Their hands rested casually near their sidearms, not threatening but ready. You will come with us now or we will escort you. The choice is yours, but you will be leaving this post. Mitchell's mind raced. He could see the trap closing around him, but he couldn't yet understand how it had happened. He had been so careful, so meticulous. Every piece of information he had collected had been encrypted and hidden. His communications had been routed through untraceable channels. He had left no physical evidence, no paper trail, nothing that could connect him to the leaks, or so he thought. What Mitchell didn't know was that palace security had been monitoring him for 3 weeks. They had installed keystroke loggers on his devices, tracked his phone's GPS data, and even planted false information in conversations to see if it would appear in the press. The evidence against him was overwhelming and irrefutable. Sir Edward made a subtle gesture. The two officers moved in closer. Mitchell looked around, seeing other guards watching with barely concealed curiosity. Beyond the gates, tourists were starting to notice that something unusual was happening. The perfect pageantry of the guard change was being disrupted, and phones were coming out to record whatever was unfolding. Mitchell made his decision. He would go quietly, maintain his dignity, and figure out his next move once he understood exactly what they knew. He carefully removed his bearskin hat and handed it to one of the officers. His rifle followed, transferred with military precision despite the circumstances. Then, without another word, he turned and walked between his escorts toward the palace's interior. Queen Camilla watched the procession from above. Her expression remained neutral, regal, giving nothing away. But inside, her emotions churned. She felt vindicated in her suspicions, but also deeply betrayed. Mitchell had stood guard outside her private chambers, had been present during family gatherings, had seen her at her most vulnerable. The violation of that trust cut deeper than any security breach. The group disappeared into the palace, and the remaining guards quickly adjusted to fill the gap in their formation. To the casual observer, it might have looked like a routine personnel change, but those who worked within the palace walls knew better. Word spread quickly through the staff quarters. Something significant had just happened, and everyone wanted to know what and why. Mitchell was led through a maze of corridors he knew by heart. They passed the staterooms, the picture gallery, the throne room. Each familiar landmark now felt foreign and hostile. He was being taken to the security wing, to a room he had never entered before. The interrogation suite used for serious breaches and criminal investigations. The room was smaller than he expected, deliberately designed to feel confined and uncomfortable. A single table occupied the center with chairs on either side. No windows, no decorations, just stark white walls and harsh fluorescent lighting. Sir Edward gestured for Mitchell to sit, then took the seat across from him. The two officers positioned themselves by the door, silent and watchful. "Do you know why you're here, Sergeant?" Sir Edward's voice was professional, almost conversational, but his eyes were hard as stone. Mitchell met his gaze without flinching. "No, sir. I was performing my duties when you pulled me from my post without explanation." Sir Edward opened a folder and began sliding photographs across the table. Each one showed Mitchell in various locations around the palace, his phone visible in his hands. Screen captures revealed texts, emails, and encrypted messages. Bank statements showed deposits that couldn't be explained by his military salary. Phone records highlighted calls to numbers associated with tabloid journalists. "We know everything, Sergeant Mitchell." Sir Edward's voice remained calm, but the weight of his words filled the room. "We know about the information you've been collecting. We know about your contacts in the media. We know about the payments you've received. We have enough evidence to charge you with espionage, breach of national security, and violation of the Official Secrets Act. Each of those charges carries a potential sentence of up to 14 years in prison." Mitchell's face had gone pale. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him with devastating force. His carefully constructed facade finally shattered completely. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time, he looked like what he truly was, a frightened man who had made terrible choices and was now facing the consequences. However, Sir Edward continued, leaning back in his chair, "Her Majesty is prepared to offer you a choice. You can cooperate fully with our investigation, tell us everything about who you've been working with and what information you've compromised. In exchange, we might be able to avoid criminal prosecution. You would be dishonorably discharged from service, banned from any future government or military employment, and required to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements. You would leave this palace today and never return." Or Sir Edward's voice hardened. "We can turn this entire matter over to the police and the Crown Prosecution Service. You'll be arrested, charged, and tried publicly. Your name and your crimes will become international news. Your family will be dragged through the media circus. Every detail of your betrayal will be examined and publicized." Mitchell stared at the evidence spread before him. There was no escape, no clever explanation that would make this go away. He had gambled and lost, and now he had to choose between two equally devastating paths. His career was over either way. His reputation was destroyed. The only question was whether he would face it privately or have his shame broadcast to the world. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Mitchell finally spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I'll cooperate." The confession took 3 hours. Mitchell spoke slowly at first, his words halting and careful. But as the afternoon wore on and the weight of his secrets became too heavy to carry alone, the truth poured out of him in waves. Sir Edward recorded everything, his expression growing darker with each revelation. It had started innocently enough, or so Mitchell claimed. 5 years ago, fresh from his deployment in Afghanistan, he had been selected for the prestigious posting at Buckingham Palace. It was meant to be the pinnacle of his military career, a position of honor and trust. His family had been so proud. His father, a retired Army colonel, had tears in his eyes at the ceremony, but the salary, while respectable, wasn't enough to cover his mounting debts. He had made some poor investment choices, got involved in online gambling, and suddenly found himself drowning in obligations he couldn't meet. That's when he was approached by a journalist from one of the tabloid newspapers. Just small things at first, they had said. Just confirmation of rumors. Nothing that would truly harm anyone. The first payment had been £500 for confirming the Queen's attendance at a private charity event. It seemed harmless. The information would become public anyway in a few days. Mitchell convinced himself he wasn't doing anything truly wrong. But that first small compromise opened a door that he could never fully close again. The requests escalated gradually. Details about the royal family's private schedule. Information about who visited the palace and when. Snippets of conversations overheard during his duties. Each piece of intelligence brought more money, and Mitchell's financial situation slowly improved. He paid off his debts, bought a nicer apartment, started saving for retirement. The guilt was there, always present, but he had become skilled at pushing it aside. Then, about 18 months ago, everything changed. His usual contact at the tabloid was replaced by someone new. Someone who asked different questions and paid significantly more money. Someone who wanted information that had nothing to do with gossip or celebrity culture. They wanted security protocols, emergency procedures, details about the palace's defensive systems. Mitchell had balked at first, sensing that he had crossed into genuinely dangerous territory. But by then he was in too deep. The new contact made it clear that they had documentation of everything he had done over the previous years. If he refused to cooperate, they would expose him. His career would be destroyed, his family shamed, and he would likely face criminal prosecution. So he continued, hating himself more with each passing day. He documented patrol routes and shift changes. He photographed security cameras and alarm systems. He recorded conversations about potential threats and protective measures. All of it was compiled, encrypted, and passed along to his handlers through a series of dead drops and encrypted messages. Sir Edward listened to all of this with barely contained fury. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a privacy breach or a tabloid scandal. This was a comprehensive intelligence operation targeting the British royal family. Someone had systematically compromised their security, and Mitchell had been their willing instrument. "Who are you working for?" Sir Edward demanded. "I need names, organizations, everything you know." Mitchell shook his head miserably. "I don't know. I swear I don't know. I never met them in person. Everything was done through encrypted apps and anonymous accounts. The money came through offshore transfers that I couldn't trace. They were professionals, sir. Real professionals. They covered their tracks completely." Sir Edward slammed his hand on the table, making Mitchell jump. "That's not good enough, Sergeant. You compromised the security of the British Crown. You put the royal family at risk. And you're telling me you don't even know who you were working for?" Mitchell's hands were shaking now. "I tried to find out. God knows I tried. But they were always one step ahead. When I asked questions, they reminded me what would happen if I didn't cooperate. When I tried to trace the money, it disappeared into financial black holes. I'm not a spy, sir. I'm just a soldier who made terrible mistakes and got in over my head." The interrogation continued for another hour, with Sir Edward methodically extracting every detail Mitchell could remember. Dates, amounts, types of information requested, methods of communication, everything. By the time it was over, they had a clearer picture of the operation, but still no concrete leads on who was behind it. Sir Edward left Mitchell in the interrogation room, now guarded by 2 officers, and made his way back to Queen Camilla's private study. She was waiting along with King Charles, who had been briefed on the situation earlier that afternoon. The king's face was grim, his usual warmth completely absent. "Your Majesties," Sir Edward began, standing before them with the weight of bad news heavy on his shoulders. "Sergeant Mitchell has confessed to everything. The situation is worse than we initially believed. This wasn't just about selling gossip to tabloids. This was a sophisticated intelligence operation targeting palace security." He detailed everything Mitchell had revealed, watching as the royal couple's expressions grew increasingly troubled. Queen Camilla's knuckles were white where she gripped the arms of her chair. King Charles stood and walked to the window, his back rigid with tension. "Do we know who's behind this?" the king asked without turning around. "Not yet, sir, but we're working with MI5 to trace the money and communications. Whoever they are, they're highly sophisticated. This kind of operation requires resources and expertise that suggest either a foreign intelligence service or a well-funded criminal organization." Queen Camilla finally spoke, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "What about the information he passed along? How much damage has been done?" "We're conducting a full security audit as we speak. Every protocol Mitchell had access to is being changed. Camera positions, patrol routes, communication systems, all of it. We're essentially rebuilding our security infrastructure from the ground up. It will take time, but we'll get there." "And Mitchell himself?" King Charles asked, turning back to face them. Sir Edward hesitated. "He's agreed to cooperate fully and sign the non-disclosure agreements. Per our arrangement, we can avoid criminal prosecution if your Majesties approve. He'll be dishonorably discharged and barred from any future government service. He understands he's never to speak of this to anyone." Queen Camilla and King Charles exchanged a long look, communicating in the silent language of a couple who had weathered many storms together. Finally, the king nodded slowly. "Process his discharge," the king said quietly. "Make sure he understands the severity of what he's done and the mercy we're showing by not pursuing criminal charges. And Sir Edward, I want regular updates on the MI5 investigation. Whoever orchestrated this operation is still out there, and they represent an ongoing threat. Yes, sir. I'll see to it immediately." As Sir Edward left to carry out his orders, Queen Camilla remained seated, her mind racing through implications and consequences. They had caught the mole, but the larger threat remained unidentified. Somewhere out there, someone had spent significant resources to compromise palace security. The question was why, and more importantly, what they planned to do with the information they had acquired. What she didn't know yet was that Mitchell's removal would trigger a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of royal security and reveal a conspiracy far larger than anyone had imagined. 3 days after Mitchell's removal, something unexpected happened. It began with a phone call at 2 a.m. Sir Edward Hartley was pulled from a deep sleep by the urgent ringing. The voice on the other end belonged to Agent Sarah Chen from MI5, and her words immediately cleared any remaining fog from his mind. "We found something. You need to come to headquarters immediately. Don't tell anyone where you're going, not even the palace. Just get here now." An hour later, Sir Edward sat in a secure briefing room deep within MI5's London headquarters. Agent Chen stood before a wall of monitors, each displaying different pieces of information: financial records, surveillance footage, intercepted communications, and dozens of photographs of people Sir Edward had never seen before. "We traced the money," Agent Chen began without preamble. "The payments to Mitchell came through a series of shell companies and offshore accounts, just like he said. But our forensic accountants are very good at their jobs. They followed the trail backward through 6 different countries and 14 different corporate entities." She clicked a remote, and a photograph appeared on the central monitor. It showed a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, wearing an expensive suit and standing outside what appeared to be a private club in London. The money ultimately traces back to this man. Lord Edmund Blackwood, former Member of Parliament, current director of multiple private security firms, and according to our intelligence, a man with very questionable connections to several foreign intelligence services. Sir Edward leaned forward, studying the photograph. "I know that name. He was investigated years ago for insider trading, but nothing ever came of it. He has connections everywhere, including within the royal household, which brings us to the really disturbing part." Agent Chen clicked again and a series of new images appeared. "These are surveillance photos from the past 2 years. They show Lord Blackwood meeting with various individuals at different locations around London. Notice anything interesting? Sir Edward's blood ran cold as he recognized faces in the photographs. Palace staff members, government officials, even a few members of Parliament. What you're telling me is that Mitchell wasn't working alone. This is bigger than one compromised guard, much bigger. Agent Chen's expression was grave. We believe Lord Blackwood has been running a network of informants throughout the royal household and government for at least 5 years, possibly longer. Mitchell was just one small piece of a much larger operation. The scope of what we're uncovering is frankly terrifying. Sir Edward stood and began pacing, his mind racing through the implications. If what you're saying is true, then virtually every aspect of palace security could be compromised. Any one of dozens of people could be feeding information to Blackwood. We can't trust anyone, that's why I called you alone. Until we know the full extent of the network, we can't risk alerting anyone who might be involved. We need to move carefully and quietly. But Sir Edward, there's something else. Something that makes this even more urgent. Agent Chen pulled up a document on the screen. It was an intercepted email. The text partially encrypted but readable. What we've been able to decode suggests that Blackwood isn't just collecting information for blackmail or financial gain. He's working for someone else, someone with significantly more resources and considerably darker intentions. The words on the screen chilled Sir Edward to his core. The email referenced a timeline, specific dates in the coming months. It mentioned vulnerabilities in security protocols and windows of opportunity. Most disturbingly, it included phrases like final phase and primary targets. This wasn't just espionage. This was preparation for something catastrophic. You think they're planning an attack? Sir Edward's voice was barely above a whisper. We think it's a possibility we can't ignore. The amount of detailed security information Blackwood has collected, the specific focus on protective protocols and emergency procedures, the references to timing and opportunities. All of it points toward planning for some kind of assault on the royal family or palace infrastructure. Sir Edward's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his phone. I need to inform their majesties immediately. We need to evacuate, increase security, lock down the entire palace. Agent Chen raised a hand to stop him. That's exactly what we can't do. If we show our hand now, Blackwood and whoever he's working with will know we're onto them. They'll either accelerate their plans or disappear completely. We'll lose our chance to stop this and identify everyone involved. We need to let this play out a little longer while we gather more intelligence. You're asking me to keep the king and queen in potential danger while we investigate? Sir Edward's voice rose slightly. That's not acceptable. My primary duty is their protection, and the best way to protect them is to identify and eliminate the entire threat, not just one piece of it. Agent Chen's tone was firm but understanding. Look, we're not suggesting we do nothing. We'll quietly increase security, change protocols that Mitchell compromised, and keep extremely close watch on everyone we suspect. But we do it gradually, naturally, in ways that don't tip off the network that we know about them. Sir Edward closed his eyes, the weight of the decision crushing down on him. He had spent his entire career protecting the royal family. The idea of deliberately keeping them partially in the dark about a threat of this magnitude went against every instinct he had. But he also understood the logic of Agent Chen's argument. If they acted too quickly, too obviously, they might stop one attack only to allow the organizers to escape and try again later. How long? He finally asked. How long before we have enough to move against everyone involved? 2 weeks, maybe 3. We're close, Sir Edward. We have agents infiltrating Blackwood's network. We're monitoring communications, we're tracking movements. Every day we learn more. If we can just hold out a little longer, we can roll up the entire operation and everyone associated with it. Sir Edward nodded slowly, making what felt like the most difficult decision of his career. 2 weeks, but I'm briefing their majesties. I won't lie to them about the level of threat we're facing. They have a right to know and a right to make informed decisions about their own safety. Agent Chen considered this, then nodded. Agreed, but emphasized the need for discretion. If this gets out, if anyone in Blackwood's network catches wind that we're onto them, everything we've built falls apart. As Sir Edward left MI5 headquarters and headed back to the palace in the pre-dawn darkness, his mind churned with strategies and contingencies. He would need to brief the king and queen without alarming the entire palace staff. He would need to implement new security measures that looked routine rather than urgent. He would need to identify which staff members could be trusted and which needed to be watched. Most of all, he would need to keep everyone safe while MI5 worked to dismantle a conspiracy that threatened the very heart of the British monarchy. The removal of Sergeant Mitchell, which had seemed like the end of a crisis just days ago, had actually been only the beginning. The real threat was still out there, lurking in shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And somewhere in London, in a secure office with reinforced walls and encrypted communications, Lord Edmund Blackwood was making plans of his own. He had been notified of Mitchell's removal within hours of it happening. One of his other sources had passed along the information. He wasn't concerned. Mitchell knew nothing that could connect back to him, and the fool had been useful while he lasted. What Blackwood didn't know was that his walls weren't as secure as he thought. His communications weren't as encrypted as he believed, and the net was slowly, carefully closing around him and everyone in his network. The game was far from over, and the final moves were about to be played. The next 13 days were perhaps the most tense in the history of modern royal security. Queen Camilla and King Charles had been briefed on the full scope of the threat, and both had agreed to Agent Chen's strategy despite their deep reservations. They continued their public duties as scheduled, attending events and meeting with dignitaries, all while knowing that somewhere in their own household, multiple people were actively working against them. Sir Edward implemented security changes with surgical precision. New cameras were installed in locations that appeared random, but actually covered blind spots Mitchell had documented. Patrol routes were altered subtly, so subtly that most guards didn't even notice the changes. Communication protocols were updated under the guise of routine modernization. Every modification was designed to look normal while actually closing vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, MI5's investigation accelerated. Agent Chen's team had managed to place surveillance on Lord Blackwood's primary office and several of his known associates. They monitored phone calls, tracked movements, and intercepted communications. The picture they were assembling grew clearer and more disturbing with each passing day. Blackwood's network extended beyond what anyone had initially suspected. He had people in the palace staff, in parliamentary offices, in police departments, even in private security firms that contracted with the royal household. It was a web of corruption and betrayal that had been years in the making, and its true purpose was finally becoming clear. The plan, as they eventually pieced it together, was audacious in its scope. A foreign power, which MI5 strongly suspected was a hostile nation-state, though they couldn't yet prove it definitively, had been funding Blackwood's operation. The goal wasn't assassination or terrorism in the traditional sense. It was something potentially more damaging: the complete and public humiliation of the British monarchy through a coordinated release of private information, compromising photographs, and fabricated scandals. The attack was scheduled to coincide with a major state visit in 3 weeks. During a time when international attention would be focused on the royal family, Blackwood's network planned to flood the media with carefully curated leaks designed to make the monarchy look corrupt, incompetent, and morally bankrupt. The damage to Britain's international reputation would be severe and long-lasting, but now that MI5 knew the plan, they could work to prevent it. More importantly, they could turn the entire operation back on its creators. Agent Chen assembled a task force of trusted officers and briefed them on a counter-operation codenamed Operation Crown Shield. It would require perfect timing, absolute discretion, and a level of coordination between multiple agencies that had rarely been attempted before. On the morning of the 13th day, everything came together. MI5 had identified every member of Blackwood's network within the palace and government. They had traced the foreign money to its source. They had collected enough evidence to prosecute not just Blackwood, but dozens of his collaborators. Most crucially, they had discovered where Blackwood kept his master files, encrypted servers in a supposedly secure facility in East London. The raids were synchronized to the second. At precisely 6 in the morning, armed police units simultaneously hit 12 locations across London and 3 other cities. Doors were broken down, search warrants were served, and suspects were detained. At the palace, 4 staff members were quietly escorted from the premises by security officers who had been specially briefed the night before Lord Blackwood was arrested at his Mayfair residence while still in his dressing gown. The look of shock on his face was captured by police body cameras and would later be used as evidence of his genuine surprise at being caught. He had thought himself untouchable, protected by layers of legal shields and political connections. He learned otherwise that morning. The most delicate operation was the seizure of the encrypted servers. MI5's cyber warfare unit had spent days preparing for this moment, developing tools to crack Blackwood's encryption before he could remotely wipe the drives. The team moved with military efficiency, physically securing the facility within minutes and beginning the data extraction process immediately. By noon, it was over. 37 people were in custody, including Blackwood, 3 current members of the palace staff, 2 members of parliament, and a surprising number of seemingly respectable business people and professionals. The encrypted files had been successfully copied and secured. The entire network had been rolled up in a single morning of carefully orchestrated action. Agent Chen called Sir Edward from the operations center, exhaustion and relief evident in her voice. "We got them all. Every single person we identified. The files are secured and our cyber team says the intelligence value is extraordinary. This is going to lead to further investigations that could reshape our understanding of foreign interference in British institutions." Sir Edward closed his eyes, allowing himself a moment of pure relief. He stood in his office overlooking the palace grounds, watching the morning routines continue as normal. Most of the people working there had no idea what had just happened, how close they had come to disaster, or how their security had just been fundamentally transformed. "What about the foreign power behind this?" he asked. "Can we prove their involvement?" "We're working on it. The evidence strongly suggests involvement from a particular nation-state. But proving it beyond reasonable doubt will take time. The diplomatic implications are significant, so we need to be absolutely certain before making any accusations." "But Sir Edward, we stopped it. That's what matters. We stopped it before any real damage could be done." Sir Edward scheduled an immediate meeting with Queen Camilla and King Charles. When he entered the private study, he found them both waiting, their faces showing the strain of the past 2 weeks. The Queen stood as he entered, her eyes searching his face for news. "It's done, Your Majesties. The entire network has been dismantled. Arrests have been made, evidence secured. The threat is over." Queen Camilla's shoulders visibly relaxed and she sank back into her chair. King Charles moved to stand behind her, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. The relief in the room was palpable. Years of tension suddenly released. "Tell us everything," the king said quietly. "We need to understand exactly what we were facing." Sir Edward spent the next hour detailing the full scope of the conspiracy. He explained how Mitchell's removal had been just the first thread that, when pulled, unraveled an entire tapestry of betrayal. He described Blackwood's network, the foreign funding, the planned attack on the monarchy's reputation. He outlined how MI5 had conducted their investigation and orchestrated the morning's raids. When he finished, Queen Camilla spoke, her voice thoughtful. "If I hadn't noticed something wrong with Mitchell, if I hadn't insisted on investigating him, all of this would have gone forward. We would have been blindsided by attacks we never saw coming." "Your instincts were correct, ma'am." Sir Edward's respect was evident in his tone. "Your attention to detail and willingness to trust your observations prevented what could have been a catastrophic breach. The nation owes you a debt that they'll never know about, but that doesn't make it any less real." King Charles nodded in agreement. "Camilla has always had remarkable intuition about people. I've learned to trust her judgment, even when I don't immediately understand her concerns. In this case, that trust may have saved the monarchy from unprecedented damage. What happens now?" Queen Camilla asked. "To Blackwood and the others? They'll face trial under the Official Secrets Act and various conspiracy charges. The evidence is overwhelming, and MI5 expects lengthy prison sentences for everyone involved. The palace staff members will be dealt with separately through internal proceedings, but their careers in any government capacity are finished. And the public? Will they know what happened?" Sir Edward hesitated. "That's a decision for your majesties and the government. MI5 recommends keeping the full details classified for national security reasons. But there will need to be some public acknowledgement of the arrests and prosecutions. The question is how much to reveal and when." The room fell silent as they all considered the implications. The story would come out eventually, as these things always did. But how it was told, What details were emphasized and what remained classified could shape public perception for generations. It was yet another decision in a crisis that had been full of difficult choices, but at least now they could make that choice from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. 6 months later, the full impact of what became known as the Blackwood Affair was still being felt throughout British institutions. The trials had concluded with convictions for all 37 defendants. Lord Edmund Blackwood himself received a 25-year sentence for conspiracy, espionage, and multiple counts of violating the Official Secrets Act. His fall from respected businessman to convicted traitor had been spectacular and complete. The palace had undergone a comprehensive security overhaul. Every protocol had been reviewed and updated. Background checks for all staff members became significantly more rigorous. New technologies were implemented to monitor communications and detect potential breaches. The entire royal protection system had been rebuilt from the ground up, stronger and more resilient than ever before. But perhaps the most significant changes weren't technological or procedural. They were cultural. The old attitude of quiet trust and assumed loyalty had been replaced by something more vigilant. Staff members understood that their positions came with not just privileges, but also heightened responsibilities and constant scrutiny. The innocent days of assuming everyone in the palace had the royal family's best interests at heart were over. Queen Camilla sat in her private study on a crisp spring morning, reviewing a security briefing that would have seemed paranoid 6 months earlier, but now felt merely prudent. The palace had adapted to its new reality, and so had she. The weight of what might have happened had she not trusted her instincts about Mitchell still occasionally kept her awake at night. There was a knock at her door, and Sir Edward Hartley entered. His relationship with the Queen had deepened through the crisis, built on mutual respect and shared experience. He carried a folder which he placed on her desk. "The final MI5 report, Your Majesty. I thought you'd want to see it before it's filed away in the classified archives." Queen Camilla opened the folder and began reading. The report confirmed what they had suspected but hadn't been able to prove during the trials. Blackwood had been working for a foreign intelligence service. The evidence trail, while circumstantial in places, painted a clear picture of a years-long operation designed to undermine British institutions from within. What amazed her most was how close the plan had come to succeeding. If the attack had gone forward, if all that collected intelligence and fabricated scandal had been released during the state visit as planned, the damage would have been catastrophic. The monarchy might have survived, but its reputation would have been permanently tarnished. Britain's international standing would have suffered. Political instability would have followed. "All stopped because I noticed one guard acting strangely," she said quietly. "It seems almost absurd when you think about it that way." Sir Edward smiled slightly. "History often turns on small moments, ma'am. A keen observation here, a difficult decision there. You saw something others missed or dismissed, and you had the courage to act on your concerns. That made all the difference." "What about Mitchell?" she asked. "Have we heard anything about him?" "He's kept his end of the agreement. No public statements, no interviews, no attempts to tell his story. He moved to a small town in Scotland, changed his name, and is apparently working in construction. His military pension was revoked as part of his discharge, but he's managing. Agent Chen says he provided valuable testimony that helped secure some of the convictions, particularly regarding how Blackwood's recruitment network operated." Queen Camilla nodded thoughtfully. "I don't excuse what he did. He betrayed us all and put lives at risk. But I do wonder sometimes about the choices that led him there. The gambling, the debts, the desperation. It doesn't justify his actions, but it makes them a bit more understandable. People are complicated, ma'am. Sometimes good people make terrible choices, and sometimes those choices cascade into catastrophes. What matters is that we caught it before irreparable harm was done." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of King Charles, who had just returned from a meeting with the Prime Minister. He looked tired but satisfied. "The government has agreed to declassify portions of the Blackwood investigation for a public report," he announced. "Not everything, obviously. Some details need to remain secret for security reasons, but enough to let people understand what was at stake and how it was stopped." "How much credit do we get?" Queen Camilla asked with a slight smile. The king returned her smile. "The report will acknowledge that palace security identified an initial breach that led to a wider investigation. Your specific role will be mentioned. though not in tremendous detail. The government wants to strike a balance between transparency and operational security. That's fine. I didn't do this for recognition. Queen Camilla stood and walked to the window, looking out over the palace gardens. I did it because something felt wrong, and I couldn't ignore that feeling. If there's a lesson in all of this, perhaps it's that we should always trust our instincts about people, even when we can't immediately articulate why something bothers us. Sir Edward had watched the Queen evolve throughout this crisis. She had gone from uncertain suspicions to confident action, from victim of betrayal to protector of an institution. The experience had changed her, given her a new authority and presence that went beyond her title. She had proven herself not just as a consort, but as a leader in her own right. The public response when the report was finally released was exactly what they had hoped for. People were shocked by the scope of the conspiracy, but reassured by how effectively it had been dismantled. The monarchy's popularity actually increased as citizens rallied around the royal family. The competence and efficiency of the security services received widespread praise. What could have been a devastating scandal became instead a story of institutional resilience and effective crisis management. Media coverage focused on the dramatic raids, the international implications, and the trial revelations. Lord Blackwood's name became synonymous with betrayal. His businesses collapsed, his social connections evaporated, and his family disowned him publicly. He became a cautionary tale about the consequences of choosing money and foreign influence over duty and loyalty. But in quieter moments, away from public scrutiny, those who knew the full story understood the real hero of the Blackwood affair. Queen Camilla had seen what others missed. She had trusted her judgment when it would have been easier to dismiss her concerns. She had insisted on investigation when others might have wanted to avoid potential scandal. And ultimately, she had made decisions that protected not just her family but the institution of monarchy itself. A year after Mitchell's removal from his post, Queen Camilla attended a ceremony honoring the security personnel who had participated in Operation Crown Shield. She watched as Agent Chen and several MI5 officers received commendations for their work. Sir Edward Hartley was recognized for his leadership throughout the crisis. Even some of the palace guards who had helped implement the new security protocols without knowing why were acknowledged. After the ceremony, Agent Chen approached the Queen privately. "Your Majesty, I wanted to thank you personally. Your willingness to trust your instincts and insist on investigation, even when you had no concrete proof, made all of this possible. You showed remarkable judgment and courage." Queen Camilla smiled warmly. "We all did what we had to do, Agent Chen. You and your team did the hard work of unraveling the conspiracy. I just noticed something was wrong. Sometimes that's the most important thing, ma'am. Noticing what's wrong and having the courage to say something about it. Not everyone would have done that, especially in your position where discretion and avoiding controversy are usually the default approach." The Queen nodded thoughtfully. "I've learned something through all of this. Being royal isn't just about performing duties and maintaining traditions. It's also about being willing to make difficult decisions, to trust yourself even when you're uncertain, and to protect the people who depend on you." That sergeant's removal set off a chain of events that changed everything. But it started with a simple observation that something wasn't quite right. As she returned to her daily responsibilities, Queen Camilla carried with her the knowledge that leadership often manifests in unexpected ways. Not in grand declarations or public speeches, but in quiet moments of observation, in difficult decisions made without fanfare, in the courage to act on instinct even when the consequences are uncertain. The palace would never be the same after the Blackwood affair. It was more secure but also more vigilant, more protected but also more aware of its vulnerabilities. The era of comfortable assumption had ended, replaced by constant awareness and active protection. Some might have seen this as a loss of innocence, but Queen Camilla viewed it differently. They had learned, adapted, and emerged stronger. And on quiet evenings when she walked through the palace corridors and saw the guards at their posts, she looked at them with new understanding. She knew now that trust had to be earned and constantly reaffirmed. That vigilance was a duty shared by everyone in the royal household, and that sometimes the greatest threats came from the most unexpected sources. The story of how Queen Camilla ordered security to remove a royal guard, and what happened next would remain partially classified for decades. Future historians would eventually uncover the full truth and recognize it as a pivot.